what's grabbing the headlines in the French papers this morning with Flo Volumino. Hi there. And we're going to start off with an international story, one of our main headlines today, the situation in Eastern Aleppo, a big preoccupation for some of the newspapers in France.
Absolutely. Let's start with the Catholic paper La Croix, which is focusing on the situation in Eastern Aleppo. In Aleppo, the rebellion is trapped, and you can see a photo there of a pro-Assad fighter doing the victory sign. You might be able to make out that photo there. Now, the area held by the rebels has been cut in two. According to La Croix, the Syrian civil war appears to be at a major turning point. And La Croix also focuses on the plight of the tens of thousands of civilians who are caught in the fighting, trying to flee. According to La Croix, many fear that they won't actually be able to go home once the fighting stops. This is something that we've seen happen in other Syrian towns.
And La Croix is also asking, what is the West doing in all of this?
Absolutely. What is the West doing? That's what you can read in an article in La Croix here, because, you have the U.S.-led coalition that's continuing to bomb Islamic State group fighters as well as other Islamist groups, but it seems powerless with respect to what's happening in Eastern Aleppo. Why is the West just standing by while the Syrian regime and its Russian allies are essentially pummeling Eastern Aleppo? La Croix says, it seems like the West's operations against Islamist groups that are actually helping Bashar al-Assad. Why is that? Well, it's because 90% of anti-Assad forces are actually Islamists. And you can see here La Croix interviews a terrorist specialist, actually. This is Gérard Chalion, who says that it seems like the West is actually being inevitably forced to prefer Bashar al-Assad to the Islamists. On the outside, Washington and Paris, for instance, have publicly condemned Bashar al-Assad, but it seems like they're actually playing his game.
Well, here in Europe, meanwhile, the threat of Islamist terrorism is once again a preoccupation.
That's right. Le Monde is reporting on a story that's coming out of Germany. An intelligence officer was recently arrested on the suspicion that he was plotting to carry out a terrorist attack. This is according to local news reports. This is a 51-year-old bank employee, a family father. He had been working for German intelligence since April, according to local news reports. He was hired to keep an eye on the Islamist scene in Germany, and he was allegedly reporting to bomb the headquarters of Germany's domestic spy agency in Cologne. You can get all the details here in Le Monde.
Very worrying indeed for Germany. And on top of that terrorist threat, German intelligence services are busy trying to crack down on hacking ahead of the elections in Germany next year.
That's right. This is a really interesting story. You can read more about it in L'Opinion. This is the head of Germany's Federal Intelligence Services, the BND, Bruno Kahl. He sounded the alarm over the threat of Russian hackers disrupting these legislative elections next fall. Now, this is an interview, according to an interview he gave with the German paper, the Süddeutsche Zeitung, yesterday. He said that Russian hackers could spread fake news to try and influence voters and thus weaken the democratic process. This might sound familiar. He actually does talk about what happened during the U.S. election. We've seen that fake news was a big problem in the U.S. election. And he says that hackers that targeted Hillary Clinton's team during the U.S. election were probably remote controlled by Russia.
Well, there's also elections coming up here in France next year, as well we know. And we're not talking about potential hacking linked to that, but we are looking at the man who's now got the Conservative nomination for the election in May, François Fillon, and he's making some changes in his party.
That's right. You can read all about that in Le Figaro. He's reshuffling Les Républicains, cleaning things up, making some changes. For instance, he got rid of the position of president of Les Républicains. He's in charge now. He's also trying to make peace with his former rivals in the primary. For instance, you have Jean-François Copé, Nathalie Kosciusko-Morizet, and Jean-Frédéric Poisson.
All the people with the most complicated names.
Exactly. They're all part of his new political bureau.
Interesting indeed. He's trying to bring people together then, I guess, inside the party, outside as well?
That's right, because what we saw in the primary is that he clearly has a strong conservative base. But according to Le Monde, even though people queued up to vote for him, there's a weakness if you take a look at who was queuing up, they were all the same, essentially. A majority of the people who showed up to vote for François Fillon are from urban areas, from high socioeconomic categories, and retirees. They don't really represent all of France. In fact, a lot of working class voters didn't show up. And Le Figaro wants to know, how can the right reconquer working class voters? These are voters that often feel on the outside, they feel forgotten, and they're often, of course, drawn to the far-right National Front. So this is going to be François Fillon's big challenge.
All right, well, let's end with a challenge of a rather different kind, something completely different, in fact. A word on maths.
That's right.
Not one of my favourite subjects at school. You went to French school for part of your education, didn't
I must
you,
admit,
Flo?
I was a real geek and I loved math.
So you're bucking the trend. Apparently French kids terrible at maths.
That's right. They are terrible at maths, according to a new study. This is the TIMS. It's kind of a weirdly named study. The Trends in International Mathematics and Science Study. Quite a geeky title as well. So these are kids in CM1, essentially 10-year-olds, people in lower school. They came out last in this study, according to, compared to their European neighbors. Now, what's interesting is it's not a question of how much time they spend in math class, because French kids actually spend a lot of time learning math. It has to do with the teachers. Teachers studied humanities and literature, so they themselves are not very good at math, and so they have a hard time teaching maths, according to analysts.
Oh dear, well, that's their excuse anyway. Thanks very much, Flo Villamino, who'll be looking through the international papers for us later on as well.